add my welcome to you again, and I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and we've got a little team coming up, which is quite exciting. So, Hannah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could get some help to move the lectern out of the way. You get some chairs up here, just chat amongst yourselves, give us a moment. A little invitation, particularly to those of you on that stretch. Why don't you come and fill this bit where all the youth left, so that these guys who are going to talk to us are talking to some people. That would be great. A fourth one would be great. I know it's Father, Son, Holy... No, it's not. It's not the triune. It's us. Great. Same over there. If you feel like you're right on the edge and you think you're not going to get to see people's faces, there are lots of seats. Do come over if you need to. Okay, you might be aware that we're doing the Ephesians series. Just give me a wave if you've been on a Sunday when we've looked at Ephesians this term. Okay, good. So a lot of you know we're in the Ephesians series. We've got a great passage that we're going to look at today. It's in Ephesians 5 and 6, and it's on the topic of marriage and parenting. Woo! Right? And you're looking at me and thinking, oh, Hannah's going to talk to us about marriage and parenting. She's single and doesn't have children. Okay, so I thought I would rope in a little bit of wisdom from some of the wonderful, wonderful people we have here. So we're going to have Chris Gander, Lesley Thompson, and Leon Spence to join me. Please come and pull up a pew. Welcome, welcome, guys. Just see where you all want to sit. I'll go here, shall I? Right, I realise now we're all quite low down. So occasionally we might do that, just to wake those of you at the back up so you can see who's talking. Okay, in a moment we're going to read the passage. I just wanted to give a little, and I'm going to stand for this, just so you can all see me. I just want to acknowledge, before we get any further, that the topics of marriage and parenting can, for some of us, be challenging, and for some people can be really painful. And we just want to say that up front, we know that. For some people, you might be here and thinking, actually, it feels irrelevant. But I just encourage any of you that are feeling any of those things, lean in. Don't disengage from this. This is the Word of God. And we're a diverse church family. And we love each other. And we choose to prefer each other and support each other in marriage, in parenting. For some, it might be preparation. In others, it might just be supporting members of our family. So just lean in, even if it's not directly what you would be thinking of talking about this morning. So I'm hoping the passage will come up on the screen. It is Ephesians 5:21 to 6:4. I'm going to read the passage, and then I'm going to be asking these guys a load of questions so we can get the wisdom from them. But let's start with the passage. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Saviour. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers or parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So hopefully you've had that up there as well, which is great. So we're going to unpack this a little bit. You guys, you have had pre-warning, so just don't panic for them. They were warned about this. If we had an hour, I'd go along and be like, tell us about yourselves. Who are you? What do you do? And tell us your story of faith. That would be lovely. We don't. So we have half an hour or less. So we're going to just plow straight into the passage. But if you don't yet know these guys, grab them afterwards, because these are great people. You're going to want to know them. You're going to want to know their stories. So do that. We're going to plow straight on, if that's okay. So Chris, I'm starting straight away with you. I know your wife Mary may not want as much spotlight, but she is there. You guys have been married for some time, shall we say? It's
48, or almost 48 years.
Almost 48 years. That's quite impressive. That is impressive, isn't it? Right. So I'm going to start with a fairly obvious question for you then, Chris. What top tips have you got for a marriage as long as nearly 48 years? What have you learned along the way that you can share with us?
Well, I really don't know where the years have gone. It's amazing. But recently I Googled top tips for a healthy marriage. And at the top of the page there was a listing which offered 3 tips for a healthy marriage. I looked further down the list and I saw 10 key secrets to a successful marriage. A little bit further down, there were 25 tips from couples who've been together for 25 years or more. And just below that, there was 50 best marriage tips of all time. So I stopped there. I thought, this is getting complicated. I'll never remember all that. So there's loads of things that all go to helping a relationship work. But I thought, what are the fundamentals on which a good marriage is built? And I came up with a couple of things. Working on the basis that Jesus is the center of that relationship, there are 2 other things that I reckon are pretty basic. Firstly, there's commitment, and secondly, sacrificial love. And if I can unpack those just a little bit. With commitment, if I go into a relationship with the thought that if things don't go well, we can just go our separate ways, there is far less incentive to make the partnership work than if I commit to seeing it through whatever life throws at us. The author, Rob Parsons, says that the most relationships go through a winter season, and it's tempting to give up at that juncture. But he points out that if we can stick with it and work through the difficulties, winter will turn into spring. So couples that commit to working through the winter of difficult times eventually find their relationship stronger and more fulfilling. So that's commitment. And the second is sacrificial love. These days, much importance is placed on being in love. And what I've come to understand is that in order for a relationship to succeed long term, love must change. We begin with that glorious, euphoric state of being in love. Some of us will remember that gooey feeling. But that is essentially about how I feel. To keep our relationship alive and flourishing long term, that love must grow into a love which is all about the other person. Experts tell us that the first flush of being in love rarely lasts longer than 2 years. And if love has not matured into the giving kind of love by then, a couple may assume that they've fallen out of love and decide the only sensible course of action is to separate. So putting your partner first is an important factor in a happy relationship. Now, that's setting the bar pretty high, and you may want to ask me whether we've always achieved that, and I think probably we haven't always, but it's what we're aiming for. So in a nutshell, my top tips are: commit 100% to the relationship, look to your partner's needs before your own, and talk to each other, and take time to be with each other on a regular basis. Have frequent date nights. So that's me.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris. And while you're there, Chris, I think you've got something on the table at the back. Have you got some information that will help?
Yes. A couple of years ago, I produced a little leaflet, sort of discreet, pocket-sized leaflet, on how I can have a good marriage. So that will expand things a little bit. If you would like to know more, they're on the table at the back.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So that's what you put in your spouse's bag, is it? You
Absolutely.
take one
Yeah.
and drop
No, top pocket, yeah.
Okay, okay, great. Yeah, please do help yourselves to those at the back if that would be helpful. Lesley and Leon, I've got other kind of main questions for you, but do you want to add anything, top tips? You're obviously both married people as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So I'm Lesley. I'm one of the senior pastors here. I'm married to the other senior pastor, Tom. We co-pastor together. He's not actually here this morning because he has COVID. So he's been a bit unwell. He is over the worst bit, and he's just got a bit of a cough, so he thought it was best not to come this morning. I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is speak well to your partner and of your partner. So use your words well to them, and when they're not around, speak well of them. And so Tom told me to make a joke this morning about him having man flu and how he couldn't really cope. And so I said, no, Tom, I'm speaking this morning on speaking well to my marriage partner and of my marriage partner. So, of course, I can't make that joke about him this morning. But I do think words are really powerful. And I, for one, struggle because when I'm angry, words are my weapon. So speaking to him well and speaking well of him to others. And sometimes speaking well of him in front of him to others is helpful as well. And I just wanted to recognise, I loved what Hannah said at the beginning, we're a really diverse church. We all come from different places. So just to recognise some of us if you're married, you maybe chose your marriage partner in a love match, and some of us have arranged marriages. And there's joys and challenges that come with all of those. So a lot of this can be applied to both those situations.
Oh, brilliant. Leon, I know Sherelle is somewhere possibly hiding.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's on the back on what Chris was saying in terms of needs. I'm not always good at this, but at times I dare to be brave and ask my wife what her needs are, what her expectations are. And I think understanding is really important because a lot of times I do things the way that I want it to be done, but it's not always the way that Sherelle wants it to be done. And I think that's a part of that true serving, is in serving the person the way that they want to be loved. So for example, Sherelle likes date night, so every Wednesday we have date night. And for me, that's enough. Okay, I've booked it in, it's in my diary, we're going out. But Sherelle will be like to me, oh, you haven't made an effort, you haven't planned anything, So it's I know that, okay, I can't just put it in my diary, I have to actually plan something. So, okay, the compromise between me and Sherelle is, okay, I'll plan it 1 week and you plan another week, because I can't do everything. So it's about understanding then to be brave and understanding what the needs of the other person is as well.
And there's a humility in asking, isn't there? Not just assume you already know enough. Even if nearly 48 years, you might still need to ask questions. I like that. Right, Lesley, I'm going to move us along. So possibly for some of us, there are some lines in this passage that perhaps feel a little uncomfortable. It says, or Paul says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as to the Lord. That can feel challenging in our current culture. Would you say, is that outdated? Is that oppressive to women? What are you going to say about that?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. And I think the word submit can often make us have a visceral reaction to it. So if you're feeling that right now, just encourage you to think about, what are you feeling? Are you angry? Are you guilty? Is there something happening in your body right now to that word? And just let the Lord come and move in that and unpick some of that. Because some of this stuff, we come to the idea of marriage and men and women with what we've lived through. So we carry cultural stuff. We carry, and that'll be different for many of us because we're from different cultures. We carry what we've seen in our own family and around us and what we have experienced in our life, being a man or a woman and seeing others differently. So the word submit can bring that. But this is the word of the Lord. And it's also a translation from Greek into English. And actually, I think we have to look at the context of it. So what is he saying here? The first verse, 21, he's talking to submit. Generally, Christians submit to each other out of reverence for God. So it's within that context. And then he goes to talk about marriage, and he talks about wives submitting to the husband. And actually, in the last verse, he uses the word respect. Respect your husband. And I think in particular, that is a helpful way of understanding that word, submit, is like respect. But actually, there's only 3 verses that talk to the wife, and then there's many, many more verses that talk to the husband. So it's in context. The husband has to love the wife like Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. He never lorded it over the church. He put himself as a servant, the ultimate servant. So it's give and take. So I think in context of understanding that the husband needs to do that for the wife, I'm quite happy to think about respecting and honouring my husband, and what does that look like? So I think historically we've had this skewed, that's been taken out of context. So historically that is outdated in terms of culturally it's been, wife, you must do everything that your husband says. Don't argue back. Don't even speak. Do whatever I say. Have sex with me whenever I want. You know, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I am going to mention sex because sex is physical union as well. And if we're not going to mention it in church, where are we going to mention it? And so I think if you actually look at what marriages are like in the Bible and what Jesus brings about in terms of marriage, in fact, Jesus wasn't married. So it's quite hard to understand how he would have been in a marriage. But we see the example of Christ and the church is talked about like a marriage. Absolute self-sacrifice, giving to the other, considering the other. And I think it's quite helpful to look at Proverbs 31. There's a passage right at the end where it talks about the wife of noble character. Now, this isn't a real person. It's literary language, symbolic. It's a picture of an idealized wife. Well, actually, she owns a business. She earns money. She provides for the family. She makes decisions herself. It doesn't actually give a lot of interaction of her kind of being the slave and the servant and just doing whatever he says. But there is honor. It's a stance, the honor and the respect, and it's two-way. It's two-way because this is to wives and husbands. This is not just a text on wives, you should just be meek and mild and do whatever he says. Because the Bible also talks about not worshipping idols. So if the wife is expected to do everything the husband says, then that means he's an idol. Because Jesus says, worship only God. Do whatever God says. So we are submitting and respecting husbands out of worship to God. He is the ultimate, and we know that humans are not perfect. So a husband cannot, although he represents Jesus, he cannot be Jesus. So to do everything he says becomes idolatry. So we worship God. So there's a nuance to it, and there's grey areas to it. And particularly some of us are not married to Christian husbands. So there's nuance there as well. And I haven't got time to go into every single nuance on every single thing about marriage. But I just want to acknowledge that. So that's not possible. If your husband is telling you to do something against the law of God, he's telling you to cheat on your taxes, watch pornography, lie, do something like that you know is against what God wants, then you can't do everything he says. So it can't be that kind of submission, do everything he says. It's an attitude of heart where you prefer and respect and you actually work together. It's a partnership. And that's what I think it means.
Thank you, Lesley. Sounds like we could probably have done the whole session on that, isn't it? Sounds like Lesley might have a lot more to unpack. So if that's still something, grab her.
Yeah, come and grab me.
That still felt like a
We
nutshell.
can't cover everything.
I know that you could have gone on there, but I'm going to have to stop and go on. Leon, as Lesley said, it is a two-way thing. It's husbands as well, but it's wives submit. What's your take on that bit of that passage?
I agree with everything Lesley said.
Wonderful. Let's move on. Submission in practice, right?
Yes. It's about lifting each other up. There's times where I may not be in the best place, and my wife is very encouraging and supports me. And likewise, when I see there's areas where my wife needs help, I try and lift her up and try and see the best in her. And it always works.
Wonderful, lifting each other up. Leon, I'll be back to you in a moment. I'm going to come back to you first, though, Lesley. In your role, slightly more as senior pastor, just for this question, in our culture, we often think of the home, the marriage is two parents, and then you have 2, 3 children, whatever the statistic is now. That's actually quite a sort of European, perhaps Victorian shape of family. Isn't necessarily biblical, or how it was written, or how it was when the Bible was written. What would you as senior pastor be wanting marriage to look like in our church in general?
Yeah, so I think that view of the nuclear family, a man, a woman, and 2.4 children living on their own in a house together, is a particularly cultural thing from the Victorian age in Europe. If you actually look at the biblical families, I mean, the Old Testament is one thing. Don't forget, Jesus comes and changes the perspective. Doesn't change the principles, but it changes the perspective. So the Jewish family would have had multi-generations within a household. They much talk about a household. So there would be grandparents, married couple and children, plus servants and employees and looking after guests and people who've come to visit and things within a household. And they're not all rich to do that. So in your head, it doesn't have to be like in a massive house. So I think for us, taking those principles, but then if you look at Jesus, what does he do? Okay, the households that he lives in are believers, brothers and sisters together. They're actually, most of them are single together in a household. But again, multi-generations. Peter has his mother-in-law at his house and things like that. So, and there's many, many people together. So I think for us as a church, what I'd love to see is just that idea of hospitable homes where you may have multi-generations living with you. You may bring in people to live. If you know people in this church, you know people who do live like this, and it is a wonderful thing to see. It sounds idealised. It's not easy. It's not easy. It can't be easy to have your parents living at your house or to have people who maybe get on your nerves living at your house. You know, it's not easy, so we're not saying that. And I do think with children around, there are boundaries, you know, open homes, but with boundaries, because we need to safeguard our children and things like that. And I think that's just a healthy way to live. So boundaried homes that are safe for our kids to be in, but also open to others, and multi-generation. What an amazing witness to the world that would be. And I know that many of you have already benefited from marriages that do that and households that do that anyway.
Wonderful.
So it's more of that, more of the same.
Thank you, Lesley. Could you pass to Leon? Leon, you now have 4 wonderful children.
Yes.
As of this year, the number doubled, didn't
Yes.
it? A few months
From
ago.
2 to 4, just
Went
like that.
From
Yeah.
2 to 4, just like that. How's the adventure going?
It's going well.
Great.
Going well.
So there's a great line in here. It says, parents, don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. How do you do that, Leon? How are you bringing your children up in the instruction and the way of the Lord?
Well, to answer the first point, God has been speaking to me a lot about words. And in James, it says that if you do not tame your tongue, your religion is worthless. And I felt that kind of just hit me like, it was like a bullet to the chest. Like, and it's like, if I'm not able to tame my tongue, my children are not going to follow me. So I'm really mindful of how I speak to my children. Even like not always saying no. Sometimes, you know, when you're busy, you can just always be like, no. And it's like, okay, you really have to watch how you speak, because if you want to correct your children and your children to follow you, if you do not tame your tongue, it's based on God, it's more likely they're not going to follow you. So that's something that God has been speaking to me about recently. Also as well, in terms of the instructions of the Lord, someone asked me once, like, how do you lead your children to God? So I like challenges. So I set myself a challenge of like, can I name 5 ways that I lead my children to God that excludes church? So, for example, we have family days. So on our family day, we'll have communion. We have times of prayer in the morning, in the evening. We have times of like worship as well, where we'll sing with instruments or without instruments. We memorize like a Bible verse as well. So at the moment, the Bible verse is, when you're angry, be kind, which it's kind of paraphrased. It's like the Leon version of be angry and do not sin. I don't. You guys, how many was that? Was anyone counting? Is that 4? It was 4. Can I think of another one? And we read the Bible as well. We read the Bible. So with the kids' Bible, it's just like you've got the Old Testament and New Testament. So we kind of mirror what's happening in church. So we'll read through the whole Bible. We'll read through the Bible as well. So yeah, those are the ways or some of the ways that we instruct our children.
They sound like really, really helpful pointers, and it does feel like it's the kind of things that you might see happening in church, but you're taking it home,
Yes.
making it daily. It's not just you come on a
Yes.
Sunday for those
Yes.
things. That's life, and
Yes.
you're raising your children to do that. Yeah,
Yes.
and it is also a delight to see your children worship. They're good. They're good worshippers. I don't know if any of you ever clocked that, but yeah, your girls love to worship, and that brings real delight for others as well. Great, thank you, Leon. Right, so Lesley touched on this earlier, but Leon, I'm going to get you to hold on to the mic for this.
Oh, boy.
There are two topics that I've considered during this little prep that some of us find it difficult to talk about, particularly in church, particularly with Christian friends, and sometimes in some places it might feel like taboo. We just don't go there. You probably already know. One of them is sex, and the other is arguments, because everything is, you have a smiley face, everything's great. So, let's start with sex. Leon, looking at this passage, how do we navigate this kind of thing in Christian life as church?
Can you ask me a question and I respond to the question?
That was the question.
So,
How do we navigate sex in marriage as a church family, but in light of what Ephesians is saying?
well, I think it's linked to, for me, it's, when we think of worship, we kind of sometimes separate sex and worship. So for me, it's like, even like I like how it talks about marriage and it links it to Christ and the church. And for me, it's like everything is worship. From like, even when we come to church, it's all worship. And for me, worship is linked to work. Sometimes we don't link, like, when it says, the Bible says, you can't serve two masters. For me, it's like you can't worship two masters. And sometimes we separate work from worship. And for me, it's like, you need to work at your sex life. You need to work at how you, like, worshiping God in church. You need to work at your relationships with your children. It's all work, it's all sweat. Sometimes you might not want to have sex. Sometimes you might not want to worship God. Sometimes you might not want to be lovey-dovey with your children. Sometimes, it's really work. And for me, that's what God has been speaking about. You have to really work at it. You really have to, put on love, put on compassion, put on kindness, self-control, in terms of, like, we talk about being filled with the Spirit, but, we have to really work at these things. So for me, my attitude is just, okay, going back to the serving, okay, how can I love my wife, in that area? So obviously, sex is private, so I'm not going to start talking to you about my sex.
Yeah,
But it's
no details.
Yeah, no details. But it's you. Yes. I won't be that Tom.
I'll tell you what, should we pass over to Lesley?
Yes.
Great.
But it's work. I think I would say it's work. It's work, and it links to, like, like the date. Like, me and Chris the other day was talking about love languages. It's like, for me, I really like kind words. I like kind words. I like physical touch. That's like my main love languages. And it's like, you got gifts. A quality time, and for me, it's about showing love to the person, choosing to love even when you don't feel like showing love. That's what I would say for now.
That's helpful. Thank you, Leon. Lesley, same question.
So I was just going to say, I've got a really good book called Celebration of Sex. It's Christian psychotherapists. It's a massive read, but I'm going to leave some of these books at the back if you want to have a look. I found that really interesting. One of the things they say in there is that to think of sex like worship, and Leon mentioned that as well. But I found that a really difficult concept. I was like, what? I don't want to think of it like that. Like, it was difficult for me. And so for sometimes, particularly in, if we're looking at that Ephesians passage where we're talking about submission and giving to the other, there's a lot of pressure in marriage to have sex when maybe I don't want to, but I feel like I have to for my partner. It's not easy. Some people come to marriage with a sexual history, which brings difficulty. Some of us may have experienced abuse, which brings difficulty. Some of us may have abstained from sex until we get married, and then suddenly you go from nothing to 0 to 100 overnight. That's difficult. So let's not pretend like, oh yeah, just have sex, it's great. Get married, have sex, it's brilliant. There are some difficulties. So what will help with that? And I want to say openly to you, I've been to a counsellor because I had difficulties with sex. I didn't find it very helpful. But what was actually helpful was talking to older Christians. They were very helpful, and we talk about it together. So what is helpful in those situations, you might need to go for therapy. I'm trained to be a therapist, so I'm not dissing therapists. But it's helpful to talk to other Christians who've been around longer and can walk you through some of these things. And I certainly think in terms of the Ephesians passage, we just need to watch ourselves in front of the Lord that sex doesn't become weaponized. Like whether one partner says to the other, well, you're married to me, you're supposed to have sex with me whenever I want. Or the other person says, you've upset me, so I'm withholding sex tonight. That makes it like a weapon or a shield. But let's just also openly acknowledge it's a tricky subject. We don't need to pretend, I just need to read the Bible and that will help me get through this. No, we need to talk, we need to pray, we need to deal with what's going on in our hearts and our lives and still try to respect the other marriage partner. It's not easy, but it is achievable. And there is you can journey, you can heal, there is hope. But it's tricky.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to definitely make sure that was included in the discussion today is to break any taboo. As you can approach people that you're, trusting of in older, particularly in the church, ask. Let's do life together. Let's talk about it.
I was just going to say, and applying it to parenting as well. Parents, we have to talk to our children about sex. If you do not talk to them, the world is going to talk to them. And that is not a good message they are going to get. And I'm not talking about, let's sit down and have the talk about the birds and the bees once. That does not work. It doesn't work. There's research. It shows it doesn't work. You have to model it, talk about it, discuss it, share the biblical view on it, share what God thinks about sex, talk about it. Some of us are right now going, oh my goodness, that is like the worst thing ever. We have to get over the embarrassment. You just have to get over it. It's really important. I got over it. I used to be a secondary school PSHE teacher, and I had to teach it in a class of teenagers. So I just had to get over that. So that's why I'm happy talking about it. But it is something that's really important. And you don't have to sit down and have a really intense talk. You don't have to shove a book, here, read this book, make it embarrassing. But you can talk about it as it comes up, age appropriately. So if a child asks, how did that person get pregnant, you can talk about it, what they're asking. You don't have to go down now. I'm going to give you the full-on talk here, and this is why you must never do it before you're married. It doesn't have to be like that. Just answer what they are asking, and that is parenting, and we do it as a constant journey, and we model it, and we talk, but you have to talk about this. We have to. Otherwise, they're just going to look on the internet and films and things like that. And it's just really unhealthy, and the Lord will bless you in that. And again, we have each other. If you're struggling with that, reach out for help. Let's do this together. We're a community, so we can support each other in doing that.
Amazing. Thank you. Chris, we're going to end the final one with you. Don't worry, I won't ask you to answer that same question. But we do want to talk about arguments just before we finish. How, over the years of yours and Mary, I'm sure there are hardly any arguments over nearly 48 years, but if there is ever conflict, how have you guys learned to resolve that healthily in your marriage?
Thank you. My first thought was to make sure that sharp objects are out of reach if trouble is brewing, and then I thought blunt objects as well. But I think over the years we found ourselves less and less in situations of conflict. So I suppose mostly we've learnt to identify a potential trouble spot and work around it. We regard ourselves as a team, and if an issue arises, we try and solve it by putting our heads together rather than fighting over it. And this one is important. I think we have to work out what annoys one another and not use it as a weapon. If we're sensible, we just don't push that button. And finally, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Things get out of proportion when we're tired. Things look much more positive in the morning. That's it.
What a wonderful summary. And I would take all of those points that you said for any relationship, friendship, work relationships, neighbours. All of those are really good points for resolving conflict. And that, unfortunately, is the end of all the time we have. Can we just thank Leon, Lesley, and Chris? That is just a little nugget of wisdom that these guys have pulled out of the passage. I'm sure there's a lot more. I'm sure you guys are all thinking, well, I would have said this. Let's talk about it. Why not chat about it? Why not share, encourage each other and strengthen each other with other thoughts that you could have added to this chat? But I really appreciate that, you guys. Thank you for your wisdom and your bravery in talking about some of these very personal things. And Andy, I'm going to hand back to you.
Brilliant. No idea how I'm going to follow that, but can we give these guys? Do we give these guys a round of applause? Amazing. I'm going to keep you guys up here as well, just to help us pray. Couple of bits of good news. Wait. I've had a message on my phone that next week the heating will be on. So sorry, it's been a little bit cold today. There will be heating on next week, we've been told. And the other bit of good news is that no matter what your situation, the Lord knows exactly. The Lord knows exactly where you're at. He knows the bits of that you struggled with. He knows the bits of that you were encouraged by. He knows if there was a dismissal of anything, and he knows where your heart was encouraged. And even more than that, he wants to come and to minister directly into your heart, into your life, and into your situation. So we've talked quite a bit about talking with one another, about opening up, about speaking, which we totally believe in. And at this church, we have seen and we know that the Spirit of God loves to come and touch these areas of our lives directly, in power, in ways that change everything for us.